So this lesson is all about being a high performer. And that doesn't just mean when performing in dance competitions or performances or in your teaching. It includes that, but it's not limited to that. And this is really about how to achieve any goals you have in record time, super fast, right? And these are the types of methods that I use to go from just being an average dancer in my town, and not even the best one, but an average dancer in Santa Barbara, to becoming a world champion in a matter of months. And I mean, literally a matter of months, not years, months. And I promise I'll tell you a little bit more about that story as we go if you're interested. But right now, I want you to understand just how powerful these methods are. And these are the same methods I used to move to a remote town in the middle of Thailand and start a dance scene from scratch, get on national Thai television, and then go on to double the size of 3 different dance scenes in less than 90 days. The best part about these lessons is that they're simple, right? So simple that you've probably heard of them before. And this is something that I want you to be super careful about, because it's so easy to say something like, yeah, Andrew, I've heard that before, and then just drift off into la la land and not actually learn anything or do anything with the information I'm giving you. So I want you to be really careful. And as I'm sharing these ideas, if you hear yourself saying, yeah, or I already knew that, or come on, let's move on, stop and ask yourself, how well do I do that? Because that's what the high performers do. I take a lot of trainings to improve my performance, and I can't even count the number of times I've gone through, my goals and answered the same questions and worked on the same basic fundamental concepts that all, the best trainers in the world teach. And they all teach the same stuff because it works, right? And every time I take them seriously and I work on these things, I learn something valuable. I get a little more clear on how to accomplish my next set of dream goals. And I say my next set of dream goals because this stuff really does allow me to accomplish some crazy dream goals, and then I have to dream a little bigger to push myself again to accomplish something more. If you had told me 15 years ago that I was going to be a world champion dancer that has traveled to over 231 cities and 35 countries and had his dance idols take classes from him and doubled the size of dancing faster than almost anyone else, I wouldn't have believed even one of those was possible for me to do. But I started with a somewhat big dream, accomplished it, aimed bigger, and just kept going. And I know you can do the same because the concepts are simple. And in fact, you can do it way faster than I did because I'm giving you improved ways to do all these concepts that I did. And I just want you to remember that the key is in taking the fundamentals very seriously, more seriously than the average person. That's what the high performers do, right? The high achievers, they perform the fundamentals at much higher levels than anyone else. And that actually brings me to my code of honor. I'm going to bring it for you, and I'm going to give you some seriously effective methods that will make your life so much easier and so much more effective. And that said, your learning process is going to be much more difficult and painful and much slower if you don't actually open yourself up for me to teach you, right? So there's 3 guidelines, or I call them the code of honor, that I'm going to ask you to keep in mind as you're learning this stuff, as you learn everything, whether you're taking lessons from me or anyone in life. I want you to remember these 3 things. So you should now see a screen that says becoming a higher achiever or performer. And I say higher because I do want you to think that you're already a high achiever and performer in some ways. I'm sure you've accomplished something in your life that was valuable for you, that you went, I'm really proud of doing that, even if it has been a while for you, at some point in your life, you've probably achieved something. And so I really just want to take you to that next level and make you even more of a high achiever, a higher performer. And so now the first guideline I want to say is that I want you to stay positive. right? And this is important to me for a few different reasons. One, there's enough negative energy in the life in our lives. We don't need to add to that. There's enough other people that are trying to tear people down and say they can't do it, or you'll never be good enough, or that's an impossible dream, or something like that. There's enough of those people in this world. We don't need more of them, right? And they do bring value. There's some great things about like that negative aspect that I'm not going to discount that and say that there aren't things that are valuable about that. And at the same time, we have a lot of those people. What I think is more like we don't have very many of is those people that are super positive and are focused on dreams that are seem impossible. The people that do want to go to the moon. Like at one point that was a ridiculous goal, but someone decided, let's go for it. And there's some people that probably said, you're never going to do it, it isn't possible. But those people, they kept going for it, they stayed positive, and you know what, they achieved it. We got to the moon. That's crazy, right? That's a huge goal, especially if you look at like 30 years ago or whenever it was that we tried to do this, 40 years ago. When we started that goal, that was insane to think that somebody could do that. So the other reason why I want you to stay positive is because I want you to enjoy your journey. I want you to enjoy the whole process. I don't want you just when you achieve the goal to be happy, right? Like I want you to enjoy every moment of striving for that goal, of going for it, And so reminding yourself to stay positive is very important to that. And I think we all have that little voice that goes on inside our heads that says, "Oh, you can't do it," or "You're not going to do it," or does those negative things. And I just want you to be aware when that little voice jumps out and says something, to stop it. To stop that little voice. Literally, just tell yourself stop, and then give yourself a positive, like I've done cool things before, or I know people that have done amazing things in the past, or even just they got to the moon, That's positive reinforcement. That get rid of those distractions in your mind that are telling you that you can't do it, because those are the things that hold people back from really achieving amazing things in their lives, right? And by the way, I'm not saying to ignore all pessimistic or everything that goes into your head that maybe doesn't go with your big goals, right? Like jumping off a bridge without a parachute, like might not be a good idea, and your little voice goes off and says, don't do that, right? Like, and to me that's not even a negative thing, but that's something that's like touching on a fear or something. Sometimes your fears are going to come up, and sometimes it's valuable to listen to them rather than just go crazy. So yeah, but the idea here is I want you to stay positive. I want you to enjoy this journey, every step, every moment of it. Have fun with this. Even if you don't reach your goal, who cares? At least you had fun going for it.
So the next thing I want to say is you want to honor your journey. And this is kind of, I touched on this within staying positive, but the idea is that every step of the way, you're going to struggle, you're going to succeed. You're going to struggle a lot throughout whatever journeys you do, especially if you go for really big goals, which is what I'm going to teach you how to do in this lesson. And so you're going to struggle through those goals. And the idea, a lot of people think struggle or failure, and I'm saying failure with quotes around it, because I don't really believe that there's such thing as failure. And I'll talk about that in a sec. The idea here, though, is those things don't matter in the long run. Those are actually important, actually valuable. In fact, instead of looking at them as negatives, get excited about them. When you struggle, I don't know if you've ever experienced this before. I'm sure you have. But sometimes you struggle, you go through something, you struggle, you fail, and then boom, you figure it out, right? And then all of a sudden there's this joy that comes through from figuring it out, right? And you don't get that kind of joy when you don't struggle, right? If something's easy for you, it's not really that big of a deal, right? So when you're struggling, get excited about that, because that means you're about to discover something. You know, you're close. You're on the heels of being able to like get yourself to a new level, get yourself to learn something new that's valuable for you, right? So don't fear those struggles. Don't fear those failures with quotes around it, right? Look forward to those. You know, I think it was, I don't know if it was Einstein or no, Edison. I think Edison was the one that said, you know, when I was trying to create the light bulb, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I just learned 1,000 ways that weren't the way to create the light bulb, you know? And then on 1,001 or however many it took him, he finally figured it out. But he needed to go through those 1,000 ways of that's not how to do it in order to figure out the way that was, you know? And so anything, if you're going for something that's important to you, like you got to figure out the ways that don't work as well as the ways that do. So honor that journey, honor that process that involves going through what most people would call a failure, but what I recommend you call an awesome chance to learn something really valuable to get you to succeed in your goal. So honor your journey, honor the process. All right. The next thing I recommend is that the common sense equals common practice, right? So a lot of the things in here, you're going to, as I teach you stuff, you're going to be like, oh, well, that makes sense. You know, oh, I've heard that before. But the question is, how often do you implement these things in your life? How often do you do these things? Because the more often you do these things, the higher performance you're going to have, right? But just because it's obvious or it's common sense doesn't mean people do it all the time, right? Like an example maybe that I would have in my life is, you know, kindness. Being kind, especially to my loved ones, to my girlfriend. Like, isn't that common sense to be kind and loving to your girlfriend, right? And yet, just a few months ago, I realized that I wasn't being kind and loving. You know, I was being angry and upset with her. And I've worked on this already. So the amount of time that I remain angry and upset, these days, it's probably maybe max an hour or two. You know, if I look back 10 years ago, it could be days that I could be mad, you know, and I could be treating someone who I loved in ways that really wasn't kind. And I think it's Martin Luther King that said, you know, it's easy to be kind, to be awesome, to be a great person when everything's going right in your life. What truly sets the great apart is that they're amazing, they're awesome when everything's struggling, when, you know, they are, you know, dealing with situations where they don't like what's happening, they're not happy with what's going on. Those people, when you rise above your situation and you still are amazing, you're still kind and caring, when you rise above what struggles you're in, that's when you become great. You know, I mean, if you look at Nelson Mandela, right? He was imprisoned, being beaten on a daily basis, and he rose above that and treated the guards with kindness and care, even as they beat him, right? That's insane, right? How often, like, that's what we want to do. And I'm not saying like, I'm not saying to roll over, you know, and take things, you know, if your significant other is being mean to you, I'm not saying to stay with them. You know, you could choose to leave that person, right? But until you choose to leave that person, be kind, be the awesome person, you know, as long as you're with them, as long as you're dealing with that situation, then why not be an amazing person while you're doing that? You know, if you decide that that's not the situation you want to be in and you want to leave, or you want to take a day break and you just don't want to communicate with that person, that's fine. You can still be an amazing person away from them. But if you're going to be in their presence, be amazing while you're in their presence. And that's common sense. But how often is that common practice? How many times You know, have you gotten angry at someone, or someone else gotten angry at you, and then all of a sudden you treat them poorly because of that, instead of treating them, you know, like they're, you know, regardless of who they're being right now, you know that they're a fantastic person overall. Or even if they're not a fantastic person overall, who cares? Who are you? You know, are you a fantastic person? Right? How amazing are you? So that's just one example of common sense, you know, how easy it is for common sense not to be common practice, right? So as we go through this, I'm going to give you ideas. I'm going to give you things that are common sense, but really you got to ask yourself, how well am I doing these things? Okay, so now we're getting into my first tip for you, which is I want you to think not about SMART goals, but actually about dumb goals, you know? And what do I mean by that? Like, a SMART goal is something that's not, a SMART goal is something that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound, right? This is a very common practice among people who want to achieve something. They set what they call SMART goals. And they're specific. You know, you are very clear on what it is you're doing. They're measurable. You can actually measure whether it was attained or not. They're achievable or attainable, right? They're realistically something that you can achieve and not that crazy. They're realistic, you know, and then they're time bound. They're set like to be achieved by a certain date. And these are great. They have their place in life, but my recommendation is not to start with these. These are, I think they're actually horrible goals to start with, and can completely distract your life. And I'll talk about that more in a second. But first I want to focus, what are dumb goals? Why should we go with those? And this is actually something that Brendon Burchard teaches, and I kind of stole this from him. But it's actually something I've been doing even before I was working with Brendon Burchard. You know, I was actually doing very similar things. I just didn't have the exact wording that I like that he uses. So dream goals are, or not dream goals, dumb goals are dream focused, right? So they really focus on, like, what do you dream about? You know, so many people forget about what they dream about. You know, they grow up wanting to be a fireman or an astronaut or something like that. But at some point, like, too many people have said, be realistic and stuff like that, and they stop focusing on their dreams, you know? And so I think the first thing is to look for a goal that's dream focused. The second thing is make it uplifting, you know, make it inspiring or sexy, you know, something. And when I say sexy, I don't mean like in the sexual sense. I just mean like that appeal, right? They appeal to you on the inside. They excite you. They make you want to do something with your life, you know, or I don't want to say do something with your life. Sorry. What I mean is they make you want to achieve that dream focused goal, right? They really excite you. The next thing is that they're method based, meaning there's actually a way to achieve this, you know? And for me, this one actually is not as important as the others. It is helpful. It is very helpful to find a method-based one, because then you have a method to follow and it's more likely that you'll achieve that. And at the same time, like, I did not have a method to go about, at least not a clear, specific method to go about traveling the world teaching dance. You know, when I started doing it, there wasn't really anyone else doing this, right? I mean, there were a few of my instructors that I loved and was like, oh my gosh, you guys are amazing, that were traveling the world teaching dance. I don't think any of them were doing it literally full-time traveling. I think they did it on a occasional basis, right? They would go travel and teach maybe for a month, and then they'd come home for a month or so, you know, and then they'd go out for another week or two, and then they'd come home for a couple months. So they did some traveling, but there wasn't anyone that was literally just going 1 week in this city, next week in that city, next week in that city. And that's what I did for 15 years, is I just went week by week to different cities, literally teaching in as many as 49, I think, 49 different cities in a year. And so there wasn't any method that I had to do this. Now, I was smart. I tried to figure out, like, what are the closest things that other people do that are similar, you know? And so I actually went outside of dance and started training under, you know, like Brendon Burchard is a high performer. I didn't train under him back then. I was training under Blair Singer, who was not the author, but he was the salesperson for Rich Dad Poor Dad. I don't know if you've heard of that book or not, but it's one of the best-selling books of all time for finances and for becoming an entrepreneur. He did Rich Dad Poor Dad. Robert Kiyosaki did Rich Dad Poor Dad, and Blair Singer was his sales guy. And I also did a bunch of books in that series that were his own books. But I started training under him because he knew how to sell things, as well as he knew how to teach teachers and teach trainers how to improve their facilitation and things like that. So I started learning from these people that had methods that were similar to what I was doing. But I didn't have an actual step-by-step, this is how I'm going to achieve my goal of traveling the world to teach dance. But I created that as I went. I now have that method, and it gets better, and I'm going to be sharing that with you in Dance Ninjas. That's one of the great things about being a Dance Ninja is you get these methods that I've created already. The last thing about a dumb goal is it should be behavior triggered, or I like to call it human automation. And that's the idea, or even manual automation might be another way to put it, you know, because I don't know how much you know about automation, but the idea of automation is that it just happens automatically without any input, usually without any input from a human, you know. So computers are automated. When you press a button, then a bunch of things happen, right? And we can also instill kind of a human automation or manual automation or a behavior trigger in our own methods and goals as we go along by, for example, if you know you lose your keys and you constantly are losing your keys and you want to stop losing your keys, then maybe the goal you set or the behavior trigger you set is that as every time you touch the doorknob to walk into your house, you know, or as you open the door and you visualize walking into your house, you visualize a giant cliff, and you can see all the way down this cliff, and you've dropped your keys down, right? And so when you open that door and you visualize that, that immediately makes you think, where am I going to put my keys? And then you choose to put your keys in a very specific spot, right? And that's a behavior trigger, and it takes a few times to set it up, right? It's not like now that I've told you this, it's automatically going to happen. You need to actually practice it. So I would say, you know, probably 5 to 10 times, probably just 5 times is enough that you'll start to remember it. But just literally go to your door. You know, you could pause this right now and go to your door, open the door, visualize that valley or that cliff, and you dropping your keys, and then like take your keys and put them on a hook by the door or something along those lines, right? And maybe also I would probably also recommend doing it every time you pick up your keys, you know, just in case you take your keys without going outside your door. Maybe the other thing is when you pick up your keys, you visualize that as well. Or maybe when you put your keys in your purse, or I don't know, some other time when you tend to lose your keys besides when you get in the door. But do that 5 times, visualize that drop, and then the next time you come in the door, you'll probably remember that without even thinking about it, and then you'll naturally go and put your keys on the hook. So that's the idea behind a behavior trigger. And the more of those you can have, the easier it becomes to keep on focus of your goals. And the other thing I want to say is, you know, I mentioned earlier a SMART goal set before a dumb goal, right? If you only use SMART goals, they can actually be a huge distraction to you in the long run, right? And they're distractions on things that don't matter to you in the long run, right? They're actually huge distractions right now, but they're distractions about things that maybe don't matter. For example, if I set a really good goal, but it doesn't take me any closer to my dream of, for me right now, my dream is to have the largest teacher training and dance training in the world, and I am super excited about that. And that's why I went online, is because I know that's the way to go about it, is to start online. And I'll have some offline stuff as well. We'll be doing some big events and things like that, but I know that I can grow it fast online, so for me, a SMART goal that's measurable, achievable, and all that kind of stuff that might be valuable, but what if it's distracting me from my actual goal? What if it's slowing me down from actually achieving the thing that makes me excited to wake up in the morning and do what I want to do, then it's probably not a great goal. So for me, if you start with the dumb goals and really get those, really understand what you want to do in your life, then the SMART goals can help you achieve those things. So I want you to think about, and I'm going to help you think about how to achieve your dumb goals. I'm going to actually take you through and give you some ideas of how to achieve that. Not achieve, how to figure out what your dumb goals are. I know some of you are probably like, I don't even know what goals, what dream goal I have anymore. You've been so, in touch with the day-to-day operations of life that you might have forgotten what your dreams are. So I'm going to take you through 9 questions to help you find your dream goal. And the first thing I want to say about these questions is, I started them as, like, think about it as far as teaching dance, but at the same time, like, if you want to think about it, maybe teaching dance isn't your dream goal. So if your dream goal is something else, like, maybe it's creating an environmental product that, saves water or something like that. Whatever your goal is, whether it's dance related, teaching related, or what, these questions will work for it. But some of them might talk about teaching, and because I'm usually training people to teach dance, right? So I'm looking at, within that, how do we focus on your dreams within teaching dance? But at the same time, if you want to take this and just reword it a little bit, that works too. Like this first question, why do you teach dance? Instead of asking that, you can just ask, what motivates you? What are you excited about? Why do you do whatever it is you do in your life? What do you want? Or what would you like to do in your life? And we're going to get more specific through these 9 questions, but start with that. Start with what motivates you. And you don't need to answer these questions right now, but as I'm saying them, think about them. And then as we go at the end, once I've gone through all 9 of these, I'm actually going to give you a structure to be able to get through them really quick, right? Because sometimes it's just overwhelming, and, answering 9 questions will take you hours and hours and hours. And this is one of the ways that I've actually improved on my mentors, is I figured out a way to get these questions answered in about 5 minutes, and maybe 10 minutes, but like, instead of hours, I can literally get people through this in 5 minutes and get them to really be excited about a goal, and it might not be the perfect goal, but it's a goal that gets them started. And as they go through, they're going to adjust these goals. They're going to figure out what works best for them. All right. So the next question is, what are you currently doing to accomplish this goal? Think about that. What are you currently doing to accomplish whatever goal, or what motivates you? What are you doing to accomplish what motivates you? Do you do that on a daily basis? Do you do something that motivates you on a daily basis? You know, if you're teaching dance and you love teaching dance, what are you currently doing to teach dance? Do you hold a lesson per week? Do you teach, 20 lessons per week? Just think about, what are you already doing? And part of this is just, if you are doing things, I want you to appreciate what you're already doing, because you're taking steps for that, right? And if you're not taking steps, that's okay too, but I want you to recognize that you're not taking steps towards your goal yet, and then that can kind of light a fire underneath you when you start to realize, wow, I haven't done anything in the last year to accomplish my goal, or even just something that motivates me. And the next question is, what are your long-term goals, or dance goals or teaching goals? And you can look at it in different ways. So my instructors used to actually separate it into 4 categories. They'd say, what are your relationship goals? What are your health goals? What are your spiritual goals? And what are your business goals? And if you want to separate it out like that, that's totally fine. I think that's a great idea. I have a little bit quicker way to go through it because I think for you, you'll probably kind of, if you just think of your long-term goals, you'll start to think of those kind of things, even if you just think business and even just by me mentioning those 4 categories of business, health, spiritual, and spiritual doesn't have to be religious, just to be clear. Spiritual could just be your own faith in your ability to do things. But sorry, I got off track. Relationships, health, spiritual, and business. What are your long-term goals for those? And if you don't have one for one of those, that's fine too. You don't need to fill out all of those. That's why for me, I just start with, what are your long-term goals? And I go with dance goals. And then I ask, what are your dream goals? What do you really dream about doing? Think beyond long-term. Most people, when they think long-term dance goals, they get a little boring, a little dry. They might say something along the lines of, well, I want to be teaching a weekly class, or I want to be, it's just not it's not really their dream. They're being too realistic a lot of the time, So with a dream goal, I want you to really think, if there were no limits in life, if there was no time limit, no monetary limit, nobody holding you back, you could be anybody in the world, and maybe even better than anybody in the world. You could take all the qualities of Gandhi, Jesus Christ, Nelson Mandela, the best dancers in the world, the best teachers in the world. You could take all those qualities and put them inside your body and just be the most amazing person in the world. What would you want to do with your life? What would your dream goals be if you were that person? Yeah, really, don't be afraid to push yourself here. This is your dream. There's no limits here. You can even get rid of the body limits of gravity and stuff like that if you want. Maybe your goal is to defy gravity. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I just want you to look at what is a dream, because that's something that's going to excite you. That's going to get, even if you're just spending a minute every day doing something that gets you moving towards achieving that goal, even if it's not possible, as far as we know it right now, who cares? Because you get to live towards doing something for that. And that to me is exciting. It's about having a bigger purpose in life than what the average person thinks is possible. The next thing I ask is, what are your non-dance goals? We kind of covered this before, but when I'm working with dancers or teachers, it's important for me to remind them that, there's other things in life besides dance, other things besides teaching. And I want you to think of that too. And so in this case, if you already are thinking non-dance wise, You know, maybe your dream goal was something along the lines of creating a product that's environmentally friendly, you know, and something that nobody's ever heard of before, right? Then I want you to think, okay, what are your non-environmental goals? You know, is there anything else in your life, you know, business-wise or relationship-wise that you're excited about? Do you want to get married? You know, like, do you want to make lots of money? Do you want to have kids? You know, those are all goals for some people. You know, for me, like, I don't know if I like, those aren't big goals for me. Like, I grew up like marriage is a good thing and kids are a great thing and all that, but I don't know if those are goals that actually drive me, you know? So they're not my huge goals. So for me, they're not in this list. So, but that doesn't mean they aren't important for you. That doesn't mean that, you know, having kids or something like that isn't something that you really do dream about. And, you know, I want you to think about that as you go through, even if it's not something that you think is possible anymore. Okay. The next goal is, if you look at all the goals you've thought about so far, what is your single biggest goal? You know, and some people break it down to categories. You know, what's your biggest goal in relationship category? What's your biggest goal in health category, and so on. And then overall that, what's the single biggest goal of all of those? So if you're struggling with figuring out your single biggest goal, look at like 3 of the goals and which is the biggest of those, and then look at 3 others, what's the biggest of those, and then compare the top 2 that you've decided on and decide what's the biggest out of those. But for me, it's pretty easy. Usually once I've created these, I can look at what is my single biggest goal? What's the one that really, like, if I could only accomplish one of these, that one stands out, you know? And often that goal will usually, if I accomplish that, it usually accomplishes all the others as well. You know, and not always, but a lot of the time it does. And the next question I ask is, you know, how will you feel once you've achieved this goal? You know, so like I was working with someone recently that their goal was to, you know, and it took a while to figure this out. Like it took about 30 minutes to figure this out, maybe 20 minutes to figure it out. But and I say a while, that's not a long time. A lot of people take years to figure out their dream goal, like something that really excites them and motivates them, you know. But it took this guy about 20 minutes to figure it out, but eventually he figured out his dream was to create, you know, the largest teacher training in his dance style, and really make his city known worldwide for being the best place to learn how to teach his dance style, you know. And you know, once he realized, like, how would he feel once he achieved that goal? It was like, I'd be on cloud 9, you know, like I'd be so excited. It would just be like, yeah, I don't even know how to describe that for me. I mean, if I look at like, how would I feel if I had the biggest dance school in the world? You know, I was helping millions of people, you know, even let's look at, I've helped 1 million people improve their teaching and improve their dancing. You know, how would that make me feel? You know, and honestly, I might have already hit that number. I don't know. Like, I didn't keep track. And that's the cool thing now online. I can actually keep track of that stuff. But if I actually knew that number and could see, yes, I've helped that many people, oh my God, I would just feel on cloud 9, you know, and I'd still have goals that I'd be going for past that for sure. But it would just be so exciting. I would be throwing the hugest party, you know. And I mean, that's one thing I would look at is, what would I do once I've achieved that goal? You know, I'd throw a huge party. I'd throw something that was like free for everyone. Anybody that flew in to come to it, it would be free. And it'd be this giant party where, you know, all my favorite teachers were there teaching at the event, amazing like performers at night and stuff like that. And I'd be able to do it because if I'm serving that many people, I'm going to be making enough that I can throw a party without worrying about it. You know, I can spend a couple $100,000 without having to worry about making it back. The next question is, why haven't you already achieved this goal? You know, and this is an important question to look at, like, to really understand, like, what's holding you back from having a knowledge of how to do it. Because if that's it, that's awesome. You know, then all you need to do is go out and figure out how to do it, gain the knowledge, right? If it's time that's holding you back, you just don't have enough time, that's awesome, because that means all you need to do is figure out how to gain an extra hour every day, right? Like, because honestly, most goals don't take that much time to do. They just take actual commitment on a daily basis to do them. You know, even the goal of like doubling a dance scene in 90 days doesn't take more than an hour, 5 days a week. You know, like, it's not that hard. It's just knowing what to do, having at least, you know, some time to get into it, you know. And I think the less time you have, even better, because like that, you'll see in my recommendation later, like, it really fires you and pushes you to figure out ways to get it done faster. So a lot of times when I do something, I look at, okay, realistically, this is going to take an hour to do, you know. So then I go, no, I got to do it in 30 minutes, or I got to do it in 15 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. And I try to do it in that amount of time. And then, like, I might not succeed. But I'll usually come close. And then I'll be able to try it again later and figure out, or not try it again later, but then I have, you know, I tried in 5 minutes and I didn't succeed, but I got 40 minutes of it done. Now the next 20 minutes, it's just another 2 minutes of work, right? Or maybe I got it all done, but not very good. And now I go in and I like tweak the 2 things that like needed to be improved. But usually what happens with people is they take on goals and they think they're going to take so long, or they don't give themselves a time limit in them. And so then they never actually do that goal. They never actually even start the goal, or they just let every little distraction hold them back from achieving it, you know? So what are the things, why haven't you already achieved your goal? Is it time limit, a money limit, a knowledge limit, you know? And whatever that reason is, then you can start figuring out how to overcome that, you know. And this is huge. That's what high performers do. You know, they come up across all sorts of situations where they don't know how to do it. They don't have the time to do it. Whatever it is, they have a problem, right? They have a struggle and they overcome it. They figure out a way, because they just go, okay, this, you know, most people look at it and they say, oh, there's this problem. I don't know how to do it. I can't do it, right? Or I don't have the time. I can't do it, right? Whereas they go, oh, there's this problem. I don't know how to do it. I need to figure out how. Or I don't have the time to do it. I need to figure out how to gain the time to do it, right? I don't have the money. I need to figure out how to gain the time, right? Or I'm going to figure out, not I need. I don't like need. I'm going to figure out how to do this. I'm going to figure out how to get the time to do this. I'm going to figure out how to get the money to do this, right? All those different things, because that's how they succeed, is they overcome their problems. And that's, if there were nothing else that you got from this session, but you got the fact that every time you have a problem, you figure out a way to overcome it, right? That would be huge. That would be huge. That is so valuable. And I do want to say, it's actually only valuable if you're going for a dumb goal, a dream goal, right? Because if it's overcoming something that doesn't really matter to you, you could spend hours, you know, overcoming something that in the long term, you look at it and, you know, if you were to die today, would you really care that you overcame that challenge? You know? So it's really important that you start with these dream goals, because like I want you to live your life like really excited about what you've done, you know, and think about, like, if you were on your deathbed, like, would this goal matter to you? Would having achieved that goal matter to you? You know, and that might be one of the reasons why you haven't achieved the goal, is because maybe it didn't matter that much. And so maybe your goal isn't really your dream goal, and maybe you should start over with question 1 and go back through it and do it again, you know? And that's okay. You know, sometimes it does take a couple times to really figure out what your true dream goal is. You know, like I said, I've done these types of questions hundreds of times. Well, that's probably an exaggeration. Probably not hundreds. Certainly more than 10 times. Certainly more than 10 times have I gone through these types of questions. But I don't know how many times. I didn't count. Okay, the last goal is, or the last question is, if you knew how to, you know, achieve whatever goal it is that you set, you know, if you knew how to grow your dance scene to be the biggest dance scene in the world, would you do it? If you knew how to, you know, hold the biggest teacher training in the world, would you do it? If you knew how to do that, whatever your goal is, you know, would you do it? You know, and this is an important question, because if you are at the point where, okay, now I know how to do it, you know, and that includes how to get the money to do it. That includes how to have the time to do it, you know, all that. If you knew how to actually succeed in this goal, would you do it? You know, if you say no to that, then that's not your dream goal, you know, because those dreams, when they drive you, they kind of take over. They kind of take over everything else, and it doesn't matter. Everything else doesn't really matter as much. So you got to look back on it and go, okay, maybe my goal wasn't that, you know, maybe like for you, making the biggest teacher training in the world, but you know how to do it, but it means, you know, what's it mean? Means you have to give up. I mean, this is ridiculous because I don't think it would ever mean this, but let's say it meant you have to give up eating your favorite meal, you know. Well, maybe eating your favorite meals is part of your dream goal, you know. Maybe that's what drives you every day. So if you have to give something up in order to get something else, and it's not worth giving that thing up, then maybe you got to adjust your dream goal so that you don't have to give that up. Maybe that is the thing that you don't want to give up is more important to you, is more your dream than the other thing, right? You know, or maybe there's a way to combine them. Maybe it's all about like, I want to hold the largest teacher training in the world, and we get to eat all the best food as well. I know that kind of sounds silly, but that's actually one of my goals. When I run big teacher trainings, when I run things like that, I make sure that there's amazing food. You know, I hire some awesome chef to come in and cook for us, because that is a value of mine. I love food. I don't know how well you know me yet, but I frequent some of the best places to eat in the world because I love eating good food. It's one of my dream goals is to, you know, actually one of my dream goals is to try some amazing meal in every country in the world, you know, to have traveled to every single country in the world, but not just to travel there, but to try some really yummy food there, you know. And it fits well with my other dream goals of traveling to teach dance, you know, and all that other stuff. So I want you really to get clear on your goals. And I find these 9 questions really help with that. So the last thing I want to say about these 9 questions is how to really make them awesome is to make sure that you don't spend more than 30 seconds answering each one, right? And that's because it could take hours to answer every one of these questions perfectly, you know. And instead of being perfect, you don't need to be perfect. You'll get perfect as you go. You'll get clear on these things as you strive towards them. So for me, I want you to keep your answers to 30 seconds or less. And if after answering all these questions, like you feel it's super important to go back to one and dive deeper into it, go for it. Spend another 30 seconds, spend another minute, 2 minutes, however long you want, diving deeper, you know, but don't get stuck just because you feel like it's going to take forever. This can take less than 5 minutes to do and to get yourself going. And the cool thing is that as you answer question after question, like some of the later questions will make you more clear on the earlier questions, and vice versa. And you won't even need to like answer them because they'll be answered as you're answering the next question. You know, and I do recommend you write these things down, or you tape them with your voice or something so that you have them recorded so you can look back at them later. But you don't need to spend that much time on it. You can just jot down a quick note that says, you know, make food important. You know, when you realize that later on, you jump back up into your dream goals and write eating great food. That's it, right? It takes you a couple seconds to add that in rather than spending hours trying to figure out what the perfect answers are. Now, a little bit more on this 30 seconds that I recommend is I actually recommend setting an alarm for 25 seconds. And that gives you a heads up that you have about 5 seconds left to wrap up, right? So you set it a little early and your goal is to really be done at that 30 seconds. And at the same time, you don't have to be super strict on yourself. Like you don't have to set another 5-second alarm at the end to tell you when 30 seconds is over. It's just, you know, you're almost done. And once that timer goes off, it's time to get to the point. It's time to move on, right? So 25 seconds is up. You have 5 seconds. Wrap it up. You know, if it takes you another minute, it doesn't really matter as long as like that trigger happens and it gets you to like wrap up your point. Because a lot of times you'll find, like, especially at first, you'll spend the first 25 seconds just BSing and saying a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter, telling your story about what it is and never actually getting to your point, right? So I do recommend, especially if you're working with someone else that you're telling these things to, it's so easy to go on stories. I do recommend that you actually give yourself that 5-second timer and then wrap up at the end, you know, and move on. So is this all making sense? Are there any questions? You know, if there are questions, pop them into the chat. I do believe we're getting close to the end. And we're about to do the dance training. And so I want to get ready for that. And I'm going to continue with some more concepts about being a high performer in the dance training. So if you want more ideas and you want to improve, you know, your ideas even more, go ahead and join the dance training. Remember, it's a different link to get to the dance training. But let's see. But I think that's about it for the teacher training, unless there's any questions.